Ukrainian drones strike a Russian oil refinery, and seconds later, the sky exploded in light. 1:47 hours. A single refinery processing over 6% of Russia's total fuel output stood glowing against the darkness, unaware that more than 360 drones had already begun rising from hidden sites across Ukraine. By 0200 hours, the first wave crossed the border, flying low over frozen fields, their engines barely audible. Then it happened. At 0619, a blast punched upward from the refinery's western junction, a shockwave so intense it lit the cloud base in orange, sending debris arcing across the complex. A second detonation followed seconds later, tearing through aging pipelines and igniting fuel vapor that surged skyward like a pillar of fire. This wasn't random destruction. It was the result of precise timing, layered deception, and a window Russia never expected to open. Before we begin, tell me, if you saw that first explosion from the ground, would you have believed it came from drones this small? 01:47 hours. Northern Ukraine didn't wake to sirens or warning shots, it woke to motion. Silent, calculated motion. Deep inside a forest track near Konotop, a convoy of 3 battered utility trucks rolled to a stop, their engines ticking in the cold. From the outside, they looked like maintenance vehicles returning from a night shift. But inside, beneath tarps and improvised panels, waited a weapon that Russia's commanders still refused to believe could threaten them. The target lay 980 kilometers away, an oil facility responsible for more than 5% of Russia's refined output. A site that had survived storms, sanctions, and sabotage attempts, but had never faced a strike coordinated across an entire country. At exactly 0200 hours, the lead operator traveling inside a moving vehicle to avoid counter-battery detection initiated the launch sequence. The first FP-1 surged down its improvised rail, its light composite wings bending under acceleration before lifting off at barely 75 kilometers per hour. 15 seconds later, another followed. Then another. Within minutes, the forest clearing became an assembly line of ascending silhouettes. And this wasn't happening in one place. It was happening everywhere. Hidden bunkers outside Sumy, abandoned highway lots past Chernihiv, rooftops in Kharkiv that no longer held solar panels but disguised launch crews. In total, 361 drones stabbed northward, each following a timetable measured not in minutes, but in seconds. What made this moment extraordinary wasn't the number of drones, it was the timing. The package targeting the distant refinery launched last, despite having the farthest to fly. They would burn more fuel, fly faster, and push every limit so that all strike groups, spread across 5 separate regions, would cross the Russian border within the same narrow attack window. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the countdown. 02:30 hours. Across western Russia, radar screens began to shimmer with the first hints of chaos. At an air defense node outside Bryansk, operators watched as faint traces multiplied 2 blips, then 5, then an entire curtain of returns spreading across the scope. Within 90 seconds, the network detected more than 300 airborne objects, each climbing, banking, or diving in ways no Russian algorithm had been trained to predict. In a command center near Moscow, a senior officer froze as the display refreshed. Instead of a concentrated raid, he saw 5 independent strike corridors, each containing dozens of drones approaching from different angles and altitudes. The system tried sorting them by threat priority but failed. The drones were too cheap, too numerous, and too synchronized to fit any existing doctrine. And this was the moment Ukraine had built toward. The FP-1 second pushed harder than any drone in their class, should cruising at 200 kilometers per hour, burning through fuel to stay on schedule. The mid-altitude UJ-22 seconds held steady at 1,500 meters, absorbing early tracking attempts from Buk and Tor units. High above them, the modified commercial Mugen 5 decoys climbed past 3,000 meters, broadcasting signals deliberately crafted to look threatening. Their reflectors made them appear 10 times larger than reality, pulling interceptors upward like magnets. Russia now faced an impossible choice: fire multi-million-dollar missiles at decoys, or let potential strikers push deeper. Operators across the region waited for their commanders to decide, but every second spent debating widened the gap between the 3 drone layers. And the wider the gap, the more the real strike package could slip into the radar clutter near the treetops. Let me ask you this, if you were staring at a screen overflowing with targets, knowing one wrong choice could expose a billion-dollar facility, what would you protect first? Because Chapter 3 will show what happened when Russia finally made that decision, and why it opened the door to something far worse. 0 to 51 hours. The Kirishi strike package reached the narrow corridor between Belarus and Russia, a corridor so tight that any deviation in altitude or timing could expose the entire formation. Radar nodes from Vitebsk to Smolensk lit up in unison. Operators saw not a clean formation, but a storm front of returns, layered vertically like an oncoming weather system made of metal and fuel. Ukraine widened the chaos further. 35 drones pivoted into a deep ladder formation, but this time the spread was more aggressive, more unpredictable, and deliberately hostile to Russian targeting software. At the top, the Mugen 5 decoys didn't just climb, they burst past 4,800 meters, activating beacons that imitated long-range data link signatures. Their radar reflectors multiplied their echoes until each one appeared as if it were carrying a payload hundreds of times larger. The sky above the corridor shimmered with false giants, triggering alerts across every S-300 and S-400 command console. Mid-altitude UJ-22 seconds surged forward in tight packs of 5, flying at 1,600, 1,900 meters. This time they did not simply hold altitude, they began executing wide, arcing maneuvers, forcing Buk and Tor operators to commit missiles early. One cluster flew directly into a torpedo-shaped volley from a Buk launcher near Rudnia. 4 drones disintegrated in bright flashes, but their destruction triggered something crucial. The missile battery exhausted its immediate stock. The FP-1 second at the base of the formation then advanced, skimming treetops at 35 to 40 meters. Their engines growled through valleys, over frozen streams, and along darkened roads. In multiple locations, Russian Pantsir crews fired illumination rounds, trying to catch the shadows slipping below radar sensitivity. 2 FP-1 second were clipped by shrapnel, spiraling into frozen fields, but their losses created more noise, more signatures, more confusion. Belarusian Mi-G 31 seconds scrambled from Baranovichi, climbing hard with afterburners streaking the night sky. They locked instantly onto the glowing Mugen 5 signatures. But every high-altitude interception pulled them higher, farther, and away from the real danger below. By the time they visually confirmed the decoys, the lower tiers had already opened a 46-kilometer escape window, vanishing under radar curvature. Below them, Russia's shortest-range defenses came online. Shilka guns swept the treetops. Tunguska systems fired tracer bursts into shadows. One FP-1 skimmed so low that a burst of ground fire struck its tail, sending sparks across a frozen river, but the drone continued on, wobbling but alive. The ladder formation wasn't a tactic. It was the shaping blow, a way to fracture Russia's air defenses before the real test. The moment Ukraine would strike at the radar Russia believed was untouchable. That moment would define Chapter 4. 03:20 hours. The Kirishi strike package crossed into the most fortified segment of Russia's western shield. A zone layered with overlapping batteries, surveillance radars, and electronic warfare systems built to protect high-value infrastructure. At its center stood the S-300 unit near Tikhin, anchored by the 9S-19M2 radar, known among Ukrainian planners as the metronome. Relentless, precise, and feared for good reason. Its detection beam could sweep multiple altitude bands simultaneously. Its frequency hopping pattern shifted 100 times per second, jumping unpredictably across the X-band. For years, this system was treated as a wall nothing small could breach. But Ukraine had learned something the manuals never mentioned. Every 10 seconds, the 9S-19 entered a mandatory recalibration sequence, lasting half a second, a tiny pause in which it dropped transmission completely. Half a second wasn't long enough for a jet to disappear, but for drones flying barely 15 meters above the ground, that sliver of darkness might as well have been a canyon. The ladder formation adjusted instantly. A Mugen 5 climbed to 5,000 meters, deliberately triggering the radar into full alert. Within moments, a missile worth millions surged upward, locking onto the decoy's oversized signature. The drone transmitted the radar's timing pattern in the final 2 seconds before impact. Then it vanished in a silent flash, but the message reached the rest of the swarm. 27 seconds later, the remaining drones descended sharply. FP1 second dove to 10 meters, disappearing into ground interference. UJ 22 seconds glided at low altitude, throttling back to reduce thermal signature. For half a second, the radar blinked completely blind. The instant it resumed scanning, all contacts had dissolved into the noise floor. Operators saw erratic returns. Faint echoes bouncing off terrain, metallic reflections that looked more like wildlife migration than incoming threats. With no stable tracks, they couldn't authorize fire. The swarm had slipped through the strongest radar gate Russia possessed. Ahead of them waited something far more chaotic, an electronic warfare zone capable of turning guidance systems into fiction. 0350 hours. The Kirishi strike group emerged from the radar corridor, only to enter something far more deceptive, Russia's electronic warfare belt stretching across the Smolensk-Tver axis. Unlike missiles or radar beams, this threat was invisible. It did not chase drones, it misled them. And tonight, the Pol 2-1 network activated at full intensity. Across dozens of towers, the system began rebroadcasting genuine satellite signals with deliberate delays. GPS coordinates drifted by 2 to 3 kilometers, then snapped back, then drifted again. GLONASS readings contradicted them. Navigation screens inside each FP1 flickered, showing the drones crossing empty fields when they were actually above towns, or drifting toward forests miles off course. For 5 minutes, every position readout was a fabrication. 2 FP1 second veered north, following ghost coordinates toward the Finnish border. A UJ-22 cluster wandered off the corridor after passing over a mineral deposit whose magnetic pull skewed their compasses by 30 degrees. 3 more circled, confused by mismatched altitude and heading calculations, but Ukraine had planned for this chaos. The FP1 second switched to their final fallback, a hybrid system combining magnetic heading with infrastructure counting. 7 major transmission line corridors stretched from the Belarusian border to the Kirishi Industrial Zone steel towers that could not be spoofed, hacked, or repositioned. Each crossing served as a physical waypoint. As long as a drone counted correctly, it could not be deceived. One by one, the strikers reacquired their path. The damaged FP1 limped forward with half its stabilizer gone, but its internal gyroscope compensated enough to stay airborne. Another scraped treetop branches, losing a section of its wingtip, yet continued at 190 kilometers per hour toward the refinery's glow. By 0550 hours, 24 drones remained. The first light of dawn pushed faint orange onto the clouds, reflecting off the distant industrial complex like a rising artificial sun. Ahead, beyond the final ridge, beyond the fog, waited Kirishi's defensive ring. A wall of interceptors, autocannons, and command nodes built to repel conventional threats. None of them expected what would arrive next. 0600 hours. The Kirishi refinery emerged from the morning haze like a steel labyrinth, cracking towers lit by floodlights, storage tanks stretching across kilometers, and 4 concentrated defensive zones linked by overlapping radar coverage. For years, this installation was considered immune to small-scale strikes. Today, 20 surviving drones approached its perimeter. The UJ-22 seconds initiated the opening move. Breaking into 5 groups of 4, they began wide flanking arcs toward each Pantsir battery. The operators inside those Russian vehicles faced a mathematical dilemma. Each system could track multiple aerial targets, but could only commit 4 ready-to-fire missiles before requiring a reload sequence lasting more than 40 seconds. Ukraine exploited that limit with precision. 16 missiles ignited near simultaneously, streaking upward in bright trails that briefly illuminated the refinery grounds. The UJ-22 seconds executed randomized altitude shifts up 12 meters, down 7, up 5, down 8, unpredictable enough to disrupt predictive fire control algorithms. Even so, 11 UJ-22 seconds were intercepted in expanding spheres of fragmentation. Their losses were expected, even necessary, because every missile launched created a 15-second window where the Pantsirs could not engage new threats. That was the moment the FP1 second accelerated. Flying at 190 to 200 kilometers per hour, the strikers cut through the low-altitude blind zone and crossed into minimum engagement range. the point where missiles could no longer track effectively, and autocannons became the last line of defense. The Pantsers switched to their twin 30mm guns, projecting dense clouds of sub-projectiles across predicted flight paths. 3 FP1 clipped these tungsten bursts and disintegrated. But 6 remained, carving past the last tracer lines, and entering the inner perimeter where Russia had stationed its newest system, the Derivatsia PVO. Its 57mm programmable shells began constructing a layered grid of detonation points, 300 meters, 250, 200, 150, creating a volume of tungsten that no aircraft was meant to cross. Yet, its designers had built a safeguard. Below 100 meters, the system paused firing to avoid damaging critical refinery infrastructure. The lead FP1 dropped into that protected zone. At 06:19 hours, the defenders watched it slip beneath the engagement floor, a point their own fire control system refused to target, and the refinery's final shield opened. By 06:20 minutes, the last surviving FP1 crossed the refinery's inner threshold. What followed was not a single strike, but a chain reaction born from weakened joints, aging valves, and pressure systems pushed far beyond their limits. In less than 60 seconds, Kirishi, a facility that processed a significant share of Russia's fuel output, fell into a self-feeding collapse. Flames climbed through the industrial maze, smoke columns rose high enough to stain the morning sky, and emergency crews watched systems fail faster than they could respond. Ukraine had not relied on overwhelming force. They relied on timing, misdirection, and a moment when doctrine could not adapt. Before we close, let me ask you this. After watching how precision and planning reshaped the battlefield in a single dawn, what part of this operation surprised you the most? Share your thoughts below, and let's continue the conversation.